primaries, we see secondaries, and all that. We see the O's, you know. But let's start at the beginning. Let's look at primordials. Primordial follicles. You see a cluster of them up here. See, they're up near the periphery. They're all up here. These are primordial follicles and primary oocytes. Up here. There we go. So these here, they're not very differentiated. Sometimes you can see an oocyte in the middle, but it's just simple squamous surrounding it. So primordial follicle, primary oocyte. And there's just clusters of them up near the periphery. See how they're all lined up? So, and it's like, so let's look for a primary follicle. So here we have the oocyte, we got the zona pellucida, the granulosa, and all the theca in there. There we go. So here's primary. We got the primary oocyte, zona pellucida, we've got the granulosa, and the theca. We don't see any anther formation, but we see differentiation. So this is no longer a primordial follicle. This is a primary follicle. So primordial, primary. Moving back out. Here we see anther formation. This is a secondary follicle because we see antrum. But bunch of primordials. Yeah. So this one's kind of tricky. So we don't. So this is still a primary follicle, even though we've got multiple layers of granulosa. Right? It looks a bit larger, but we don't see any antrum forming. So that's still a primary follicle, you know, but it's a but there's also a primary oocyte in there. So again, but then here's secondary because we see the antrum. Yeah. Sometimes the oocyte is not in view. Why don't we see oocyte in this? It should be there, but why don't we see it there? If you imagine if you're cross-sectioning through a follicle, if you're way parasagittal, way off from the center, you're not gonna, when you section it, you're not gonna hit the oocyte. Because oocyte is just a small dot in the middle of this huge follicle. And if the knife cuts through way past the center, you're not going to see oocyte. So even though, yeah, so there is likely an oocyte, there is an oocyte in the structure. It's just from our perspective, from that slice, we can't see it. So like on this one. I mean, this is still a primary follicle, but we just don't see the oocyte. It just didn't happen to get sectioned in this that one. This next slide, but see how large they are? Yeah, so these are Graphian.
A larger ovary.
They're really gigantic and they're ready to go. I'll try to find one that's. I mean, it's kind of squash. It's not the roundest one. But here we see the oocyte. We see the corona radiata. We see the zona pellucida, theca externa, theca interna, all that getting ready to ovulate. This is a remnant. This is Orphra albicans. So there's, you can see it kind of looks like there was something there, but it's slowly being absorbed. But you see remnants, kind of like a fossil. Oh, there's something there. Yeah. It's just, yeah, as you pan around, trying to find different follicles at different stages and trying to determine what they are. But this one is mostly, you're seeing a lot of gradients. So it is likely that this slide came from, so if Graphian, if there's a lot of Graphians, a lot of mature ones, they can ovulate a lot of eggs at once during during ovulation. So this animal typically, most likely had litters. So like a cat or a dog or something, you know, has multiple births, they're going to ovulate multiple eggs. Humans, which generally just have one child, only one egg ovulates. But animals that have litters need to ovulate multiple eggs. Like, that's why they use rat and cat and stuff like that, because they have litters, and so you can see a lot of stages in one ovary. Just if you were wondering why there's so many Graphians in an ovary, it's not human. So that's that. Now we're going to look at fallopian tube. More specifically, this is the ampulla portion, I mean the cross section. And one thing that was kind of misleading on that model was it looked like it was just looked like an empty tube, when in fact it's not. It's quite tight contorted. There's a lot of spaces and gaps and just nooks and crannies. The best way to explain it. But yeah, so this is cross section of fallopian tube ampulla. This is, if you look at the walls, the epithelium, it's ciliated. So simple columnar with cilia. The cilia again beat and help move that egg, pass that egg through the fallopian tube, and then the sperm is swimming up current and they meet, and this is where fertilization takes place. Occasionally you'll see a chunk. These are like PEG cells, PEG. PEG cells secrete nutrients that help keep the egg happy, and also these nutrients also help keep the sperm happy. Sperm cells can stay a few days, maybe even a week. A few days, can survive a few days in the ampulla, nice and happy. So there's so they can actually, so this is cross section of ampulla of the fallopian tube, or uterine tube. Sometimes it's called uterine tube. But the reason why we chose this one is just to show you the really complex structure, and also that this is likely the site of, the typical site of fertilization. So that's, yeah, you can see it's really distinct, crazy, contorted, maze-like structure. Okay, ampulla, ovary. Okay, now we're going to look at, so let's look at the uterine cycle, but let's start out with, let's end with menses, because I think that's more, and when it comes to the uterus, it's more informative. So we'll look at the first, so this is the proliferative phase. So day, let's say day, right after menses, so day 4 to day 14-ish. This is proliferative phase. It's either called it can either be called the proliferative phase or the follicular phase. So there's two names for this. Proliferative because the endometrium is beginning to proliferate, and it's also called the follicular phase because the follicles are developed. Yeah, from the perspective of the ovary, it's called the follicular phase. But from the perspective of the uterus, it's called the proliferative. Yeah, it's so. Sorry for that tangent. So. So here we have myometrium, or sorry, endometrium. So this is where the egg would come in and attach. So this is the lumen inside. This is inside uterus. This is endometrium, and we see these endometrial glands or ovarian glands are all here in the endometrium, ovarian glands, blood vessels, and all this. This is going to develop into the lining of the uterus, which will allow for the fertilized egg to implant and to grow. Gives it a environment to which it can grow. And then, but mostly what we're seeing all through here, this is smooth muscle. So this is called myometrium. So we've got myometrium, muscle, smooth muscle, and then we have endometrium. And so this is proliferative phase. It's beginning to grow back. So menstruation has just occurred. Now the endometrium is beginning to grow back, but it's not as developed. When we go to the next one, we'll be, let's look at another one. This is, so again, just another word, another name for this is the follicular phase. So from the perspective of the ovary, it's called follicular phase. So there's always two perspectives for naming. Again, we see the endometrium, and then boom, all that that's all myometrium. That's all muscle. A lot of smooth muscle in uterus. Why is there so much smooth muscle? What's its function? Contraction for the birthing process. And then just, you can see the endometrium, not well developed, but it's there. So, follicular or proliferative phase. Now, this is the point of ovulation. At the point of ovulation, this is called the secretory or the progravid. So, it's called secretory phase from the perspective of the ovary. Because the corpora luteum is secreting stuff, but it's also called progravid from the perspective of the uterus because it's progravid, meaning implantation can take place. It's all ready because endometrium is super developed. You can see all of a sudden it just looks quite different. So here we have endometrium. See, look at so this is, so this is where the egg would implant. So this is inside uterus. And then we've got all this. This is all endometrium. And then that's myometrium. But you'll notice endometrium looks very, very developed. Because we've got two strata. So we've got stratum functionalis. All this is all stratum functionalis. Because we have these uterine glands that are really long and corkscrew shaped. They're corkscrew shaped so they can allow for that expansion as the fetus develops so that they can seek out and help support the fetus as it's developing. So these are crazy uterine glands. So that's all part of stratum. So the endometrium is divided into stratum functionalis, and then stratum basalis, where you have shorter, smaller uterine glands. Stratum basalis, that sticks around. So if implantation does not take place, stratum functionalis breaks off, sloughs off, and gets discarded, but stratum basalis will linger and grow and develop into stratum functionalis during the next cycle. And that's all myometrium. So this is secretory phase or progravid phase. You get two perspectives in the naming schemes. If you're an ovary or a uterus, it's so what's happening in each one. Give it a different name. So yeah, look at those really large, well-developed uterine glands. Then after day 28, if implantation does not take place, the corpora luteum stops secreting progesterone, and then that stratum functionalis starts to break down. See how it's breaking off? It's filling with blood. You see those, it's just not looking pretty or intact. See how it's all breaking up. So this is the menstrual phase, or menses. So this is menses. This is actually day 1 through 4. So this is actually the beginning of the of the cycle, because the reason why this is called day 1 through 4 is because everything is from the perspective of the ovary. So even though things here are beginning to shut down and break apart, in the ovary things are just getting started. The follicles are just primordial follicles are beginning to switch over to primary. So that's why. But you can see you see the endometrium, especially stratum functionalis, is beginning to break apart. You see hemorrhaging, but then stratum basalis is still going to be intact. The stratum basalis needs to be there because that's what's going to develop and grow during the proliferative phase, and then again back through the progravid or secretory. This is all myometrium. Okay. So that's uterus. Another slide. So for the GI tract, remember how we were looking at transitions? So this transition is from cervix to vagina. Cervix is simple columnar, vagina is stratified squamous. So we're going to see a transition from simple columnar. So the simple columnar is going to be secreting a lot of mucus. Here we have stratified squamous. That's not cervix. So the transition occurred somewhere.
Okay. It's gonna happen here.
Zoom back out. So that's all vagina. Stratified squamous, right? And then boom, simple. Yeah. So this is all simple columnar. You see all that mucus secretion? So simple columnar, so this is cervix. Simple columnar. And then stratified squamous right here. So that's vagina. So we kind of dropped down, looked around, and then inside here, there's mucus secretions, so that's cervix. So we go from simple columnar to stratified squamous. And so we'll zoom back out. review some of this again tomorrow, and we'll go over mammary gland and a bit of developmental stuff about growing up the embryo, a bit of embryogenesis that we'll just brush upon.